Ja,
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for those words of introduction. Let me add on, my name is Bäumer, without a T at the end, but that makes no difference. It could be the case that you want to read up his name somewhere and you see, there's a T on the end. It's not the case. So let me begin by saying something about myself and the situation I find myself in at present. I am still the managing director of the Consumer Advice Center in Berlin. That is until the end of the month, because I found out on Sunday that I'm going to be transferred to Stuttgart, where I'll be working in the Ministry of Transport. So, therefore, my time here is limited, because at the moment I'm shuttling back and forth between Berlin and Stuttgart. I apologize for that, but I wanted to come, and I've only got a short amount of time, though. I think it is excellent, let me just say this, if I may at the outset, that there is an event of this kind that's been organized here. And I think if you work at the Consumer Advice Center and you have contact with people who don't necessarily always have an academic background, but who, because of their lack of education, frequently end up in difficult situations because things have been foisted upon them that they didn't really want to have. They felt a disadvantage vis-a-vis the person talking to them. That's why it's important you should talk about the aspect of ethics in business, in academic life. Now, I don't need to tell you that much really about consumer advice centers, but let me just add that there are 16 of them, one in each state here in Germany. Then there's the Federal Association as well. Normally, these are associations, organizations that are financed by the individual federal states. Nevertheless, the people who seek advice from us have to pay a certain amount of money. For instance, €5 for people who are on income support. I think that's an acceptable amount of money, but otherwise it is very much less than what you would pay a lawyer. As a rule, we provide a consultation on legal issues, financial matters, the rights of patients, health, food. So it's a very broad array of issues that we address, and therefore, when it comes to our consultants, we have economists, lawyers, and others, because our organization developed out of the Housewives Association back in the 1950s or 60s. Now, what is the purpose of these consumer advice centers? As such, in political terms, we wish to help to contribute to a situation in which there is more equal playing field between consumers and suppliers. So people, of course, who are educated, have an educational head start over others, compensated, and therefore we want to point the way towards a new form of consumer behavior. Now, in saying new, I mean that the consumer often does not regard him or herself as being an active player in the market, but the mass of people are objectively very, very important in the market context. And you could see this, for instance, if we look at the E10 petrol, for instance, and the education was there that, okay, if we all resist what's going on, then perhaps we can achieve something at the end of the day. When it comes to the suppliers, and in this case we saw, okay, we cannot proceed as we've done so far, we've got to change things. So to make it clear to you what this means in particular for your everyday lives as individuals or for society at large, I'm going to provide you now with a few examples from our everyday activities and then explain to you what we do on an individual basis, how do we approach the people and deal with the individual who come to us, and how do we use the pooled knowledge that we have to exert influence on the politicians and policymakers in this country to make sure that we have a more educated consumership. But we've got to make it clear to politicians as well that certain things need to be changed. Now, you're in Berlin, you all read the newspapers, and I'm sure you all know that the City BKK health insurance scheme and its failure will be a matter that's familiar to you. Now, what is of interest for us is not the bankruptcy and not the way the whole bankruptcy has been handled. What's going to do with the people who were insured in this health insurance scheme? And a lot of people rang us up because because this is the other health insurance schemes or funds are refusing to pick up the patients who've been stranded because of this bankruptcy. Now, this is contrary to the law, and from my point of view, it's an unethical approach, because basically we're talking here, the insurees with this health insurance fund are older people who frequently cannot help themselves. Some really drastic cases, people telling on the phone, I'm a woman, I've got a handicapped child, or you're over 50. Well, we don't accept people with handicapped children anyway. That's the point of the health insurance scheme. That's legally unacceptable. This gives you an idea of what's going on here. Of course, everybody has to go to the Weißensee district in Berlin, and they go there, then the counter is closed. Now, at that moment, we as the Consumer Advice Center become active both in political respect. So we approach the insurance companies, and we approach the politicians as well. We said we've got to tackle this matter immediately. People need assistance here and now and immediately. So legal changes have to be made to make sure that this takes place. And in addition to that, we provide individual customers with advice. They need to be told what they can do. Things they are told things that really don't simply aren't true. So that's the first case. The second case, the number of telephone hotlines that we have. Now, the consumer advice centers have made a contribution to ensure that action will be taken within the course of 14 days, within 2 weeks. Now, you can well imagine it's not just an old person, but old people who are better education qualified have insurance contracts that they cannot get out of. So we've helped people of that kind. We address these suppliers and tell them this is not the way you should proceed, and we act along legal lines as well and say that the legislators, the policymakers have to bring about changes. The things are far from adequate, particularly when it comes to telephone advertising and the contracts are concluded there. We feel that every contract that is agreed on the telephone must subsequently be confirmed in writing. Now, I've experienced that myself, that there have been major problems after conclusion of a verbal contract because claims were made to contrary. And so on. So we help individuals and try to make sure that we exert political influence as well to bring about changes. Now, please give me an indication when I've exceeded my allotted time. So there are all sorts of individual examples that I could talk about here, but just home in on a few other things that make it clear that this is an everyday phenomenon. This is not something that is engaged in by dodgy companies, whether we're talking about Deutsche Bank, Commerzbank, AWD, Financial Management Company. These are all companies that conclude contracts with people that they don't actually understand, but they are bound to them in long term, and they will run contrary to their own interests. For instance, an old age financial scheme. It's very important for us to attract public attention to this. We don't want to pillory people, but striving for profit alone can result in an unethical situation. I think if you go to a bank or a savings bank, you must be able to expect that a financial service provider, a financial broker says to you, okay, this product is not really designed for you. And if you want a high yield, then you have to accept a high degree of risk as well. And often these two aren't put together, and then we have to concern ourselves with such issues. But there is a clear need for changes here. We see ourselves as being responsible for bringing about these changes. I must say, it's been very sobering for me after the major financial crisis. I cannot see myself that any substantial changes have been made, at least not when it comes down to people on the ground. I won't say that no changes have been made at all, or that no discussions at top management level and changes have been launched, but down on the ground, down at the nether levels, the agents live off the commission. It's essential for them that they conclude contracts, and it's still the case that there are plenty of agents who do not act in the interests of the customers they're dealing with. On to another example. They're all flown on holiday. When it comes to the no-frills airlines, I've forgotten to switch my telephone off. Sorry about that. It's very often the case is that the legal specifications that apply in the meantime in the case of late arrivals, that are not adhered to. So if we take action and write exactly what the consumer has written, then changes are made. So people listen to us, but not to an individual customer, which is unacceptable, because we must assume that of the one case somebody comes to us, there'll be hundreds of others where people say, just pay the money or don't do anything, or do not use their own rights. So it's important on the one hand to look at things on a case-by-case basis, provide help and assistance, but on the other hand, talk to because in the governments and so on, and say, these are the problems that we have. I'm going to be very drastic in the presentation of this issue from the point of view of the public at large. Of course, the other side will also have justifiable interests that have to be taken into account, but this has got to be made clear. What is the impact going to be made on the consumers if certain legal rules and regulations are not adhered to? So we do attempt to bring about changes there. Now on to my final point that I'd like to address in a specific manner is the discussion we're involved in at present about the protection of the climate and insulation of buildings. Now, this would not appear at first sight to be an ethical issue about customers being ripped off, but it's an ethical issue which needs to address us as society. Things need to be done here in the meantime. We're all aware of that fact. And now it is the task of the usual institution like the Consumers Advice Centre to draw attention to the fact of what's going to happen if certain rules are interpreted one way or the other. At the moment, the polluter pays is a principle that applies, but of course it cannot be the case if we're talking about the insulation of buildings that the people cannot afford to pay for everything themselves. And a balanced solution needs to be found. Tenants come to us. We are not a tenant protection association, but house builders come to us and say, all of a sudden, I've been told I've got to have so and so much, I don't have that money left. And therefore, our task is here to point out, together with our colleagues in the other federal states, as a federal organization, to bring about a solution for problems that are particularly complicated to solve, so that there's an overall benefit for society that is acceptable. So that was a broad array of issues, but this is our daily bread and butter, if you like. Okay, we have an office at Hartmut, opposite Zoo Station here in Berlin. Dr. Lischke, who will remain at the headquarters, will be delighted if you who come along wants to have more information provided, but I won't be there anymore as of the end of this month. Thank you very much.